arrange your life so that you're not spending every dime that comes your way. The larger amount that you devote towards your investments, the faster you'll get to financial independence. And go out and pick the brokerage house that most appeals to you, whether it's Vanguard or Fidelity or Schwab or whatever. Find yourself an S&P 500 or a total stock market index fund. Open it. Start putting money in it on a regular basis, set it up on autopilot, and forget about it. You're done.
This show is dedicated to helping you strengthen your family tree and live financially free. Welcome to the Marriage, Kids, and Money podcast, everybody. This is Andy Hill, and today we're talking about how to simplify investing. According to the Motley Fool, only 62% of U.S. adults actually own stocks. That leaves almost 40% of us missing out on the incredible wealth-building power of the stock market. Why do millions of people choose to not invest in the stock market? Well, one reason could be is that it feels too complicated, or they've been burned in the past by buying individual stocks and losing out. To help us learn how to remove the complexity from investing, I've invited J.L. Collins back on the show today. J.L. is known as the Godfather of FI in the financial independence community. As an investor in the stock market for 5 decades, he has developed a worldwide following through his popular blog and through his book, The Simple Path to Wealth, which has sold over 1 million copies across 20 languages. JL has recently released an updated and expanded edition of The Simple Path to Wealth, and it is available now. Welcome back to the show, JL.
Hey, Andy, thanks for having me back. It's a pleasure to be with you again.
I'm glad to have you back. And these conversations that you and I have had over the years have been fantastic and have really helped out a lot of people who listen and watch our channel. So I'm glad to have you back. Let's start off. Why do you believe people find investing to be so complicated?
Well, I think that's actually very intentional on the part of Wall Street. Wall Street wants to make it complicated. And the fact they do make it complicated, they've created products that even the creators of these products don't understand themselves. And of course, the motivation there is the more complicated it is, the more you can charge in fees and commissions for it. And the more you can push people into their loving arms saying, don't worry your pretty little head about it. We'll take care of this for, of course, a fee.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the truth is that's the bad news, because it is genuinely complicated at that level. And that's, of course, a lot of what you see in the business news on TV is these complex kinds of things. That's the bad news. Good news is you don't need any of that stuff. You can sweep all that stuff off the table onto the floor, and all you need is the little corner of broad-based, low-cost index funds that'll be remaining. And that's all you need to build your wealth. And that's all you want to build your wealth. Those are the simplest, least expensive, and most powerful tools to be had.
I love it. Let's dive into index funds a little bit, because
Sure.
I think some people might need a little refresher or just an understanding about how this can be super simple. Why are index funds a smart way to invest?
Well, let's first of all contrast them with what are called actively managed funds, right? The stock market basically has about 3,600 companies in it that are publicly traded, right? And in an actively managed fund, there is a team of investment professionals, and their job is to try to figure out which of all those companies are going to outperform all of the other companies. Accordingly, they create funds that they charge pretty high fees for, because they have a lot of expenses they have to cover, to be fair, and they want to make very, very princely incomes doing this. So they charge pretty high fees. The problem is, if they were able to actually outperform the market, then those fees might be worth paying. But the truth is, and there's now decades of research to back this up, is that they are terrible at outperforming the market. Something on the order of maybe 20% a year in any given year will outperform the S&P 500. And then the further out you go, the lower that percentage gets to. When you're out 30 years, it's less than 1%. That's statistically zero. So you are better served by buying the entire basket, by buying the entire index. So my preferred tool is a total stock market index fund, which buys essentially every publicly traded company in the United States of America. And that means everybody in those companies, from the factory floor to the CEO, is now working to make me richer. Some of them are going to do better than others. The ones that do better rise to the top and become a bigger percentage of the fund because it's what's called cap weighted, which simply means that the bigger the company, the larger percentage that the fund is going to own. And those that don't do so well slowly drift away. So it is a process I call self-cleansing.
I love that. Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
When they stop doing well, then and they fall out of the index, then you don't even own them anymore. Is that right?
Right. And they're replaced by whatever new exciting company is on the way up.
And there's been a lot of those lately. Absolutely. Now, I think
There always
when
are.
exactly.
Yeah.
And now when people hear index funds, they okay, now that has become majorly popular over the past couple of decades. But there's a lot of those index funds out there. So people might get a little analysis paralysis, being like, well, that's an index fund, that's one. This is tracking a different index. Now your solution is, again, wipe away all that noise and just focus on one index fund. Is that right?
Absolutely. So it's like Wall Street can't help itself. Jack Bogle comes up with this great idea of simple, broad-based, low-cost index funds. He started with an S&P 500 fund. The S&P 500, of course, are the 500 largest companies in the United States. Couldn't be simpler. But of course, because Wall Street does what Wall Street does, now there's funds, there are index funds that are in sectors. So you can buy one in precious metals and gold. You can buy one in energy. You can buy one in consumer staples. You can buy all kinds of different sectors of index funds. You don't need any of that stuff. That's why when I described it to beginning, you'll notice I said broad-based, which means either an S&P 500 or even better, in my view, a total stock market index fund. And those, by definition, are your lowest cost. My preference is VTSAX, which is Vanguard's total stock market index fund. By the way, common question I get is, well, can I buy the ETF versions of these? ETF standing for exchange traded funds. The answer to that is absolutely. It's the same portfolio. So Vanguard's ETF version of VTSAX is VTI. The other question I get is, well, what about an S&P 500 fund? That's all my 401k offers. There is no total stock market fund. Those are fine. Those are fine. I prefer the total stock market fund for the same reason I put Tabasco on my eggs. It's a little bit of extra spice, but the eggs are still the eggs.
I love it. I love
Yeah.
it. Now, if somebody's listening and I also invest with Vanguard. I like Vanguard, been with them for a while, but let's say they're with Fidelity or Schwab.
Right.
And would you say, hey, it's worth it to completely switch brokerages, or should they just do the simple thing and just stay where they are and find the equivalent of the S&P 500 index fund or total stock market fund within Fidelity and Schwab?
Sure. So I think there are good reasons to use Vanguard, and we can go into those weeds if you want, but it is not essential. So if you have an account with Fidelity or Schwab or any other major brokerage and you like them, you're comfortable with them, they all at this point, because candidly of the competition Vanguard brought to the table and kind of dragged them kicking and screaming, but now they all offer the same S&P 500 or total stock market index funds. They might be slightly different than Vanguard's, but essentially a total stock market index fund, an S&P 500 index fund is the same regardless of what brokerage you buy it from. So you're fine doing that. Don't worry about it.
Got it. Yeah, I'm just trying to do my best to keep it simple, just like you, and
Yep.
and have these simple conversations. Now, one thing that has come up again, I think there's a
Right.
theme here. There's a lot of noise out there, JL. The
Hmm.
United States is becoming a little bit more isolated from the rest of the world. Do you believe investing in international stocks makes more sense now? I know that you are a one index fund guy, but has your opinion changed in this area?
No, I still believe that you can go with a total U.S. base. And by the way, this is only true in the United States. The reason being, the United States accounts for something on the order of 60% of all publicly traded companies in the world. So if you're in something like VTI, VTSAX, you already own a big slug of those companies that are worldwide. That's number one. Number two, the largest of those companies, which of course make up the bulk of the fund, are by definition international companies. They buy and sell and make lots of their profits overseas. So as the world as a whole continues to grow and prosper, which it has ever since World War II, and I expect it will continue to do, my US based companies and my US based index funds will grow and prosper along with it. I don't feel that people in any other country can get away with that home country bias because those markets are just not large enough for them to do it. And for those people, when I'm talking to international audiences, I recommend a world fund. And a world fund just buys stocks all over the world, as the name suggests. And of course, the US is dominant in that world fund because of that 60% thing. So, having said that, I am not adamantly opposed to American investors owning international stocks. I don't see the need personally, but there are people who disagree with me. And if you feel that way, then you will not be hurt by going to that world fund that I recommend to my international readers.
Got it. Yeah. So you think even with the changes lately, U.S. companies are still going to grow, and life's going to be just as it has been in the past, and we'll continue to have that global opportunity for growth.
Yeah, I would first of all say it's not at all clear that the US is going to be less connected with the rest of the world. It kind of appears that way looking at all these tariffs, but we have to wait and see how the dust settles, first of all. But even if that turns out to be the case, and if we cling to these tariffs, which, by the way, personally, I think are a terrible and dangerous idea, but I could be wrong about that. But even then, companies are amazingly resilient and amazingly creative in dealing with all kinds of challenges that are thrown at them all the time. And again, not all companies will succeed in doing that. But those companies that fail to do that will begin to drift away, and they will be replaced by companies and people in those companies who have figured it out.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm not worried about that.
Back to our self-cleansing ability of index funds.
Right, which is one of the great beauties of the index fund.
I love it. Well, we're continuing to simplify things. This is fantastic. We've got our one fund that is helping us to continue to grow. You are a big fan of the term "set it and forget it." Can you talk to us a little bit about what that means and how that can apply to the simple path for investing?
Yeah, great question, and I think it's an important concept to understand because investing is one of those rare areas where the less work you put in, the less attention you give it, the better your results are. So I think that requires a little explanation, perhaps. So if you're going to follow the simple path to wealth, and I wrote it for my daughter, she's very smart, but she doesn't want to spend her life thinking about investing all the time. You know, you and I, we're the weird ones. You know, we're the weird ones. We're the odd ones out who like this stuff, right? Normal people have better things to do with their time, like my daughter. So the simple path to wealth is written for people like her. And by that, I mean, they understand that if they get this money stuff right, their life can be far better, far more options. And if they get money stuff wrong, then their life is a lot more difficult and the road is a lot rougher and rockier. But they don't want to spend all their time thinking about it. And if you follow the simple path to wealth, you need to understand a couple of key concepts, namely low cost, broad based index funds. You need to set up your investment with a brokerage like Fidelity or Vanguard, and you need to learn to live on less than you're earning and put a substantial amount of that into this fund, and do it on a regular basis, come hell or high water, no matter what the market's doing. Because when the market drops, that's just giving you an opportunity to buy shares at a lower price. That's a gift, and then you set that up so it happens automatically and you forget about it. Because the more you tinker at that point, the worse you are going to do. You know, it's interesting. Over the years that I've been writing the blog and now the books, I've discovered I have, kind of broadly speaking, two audience bases, right? I have the people that I set out to write for, which are people like my daughter, you know, who just want to know what they need to know to implement this and make it work for them. That's what my daughter has done. And she doesn't even notice when the market declines because she doesn't care. So she's never going to be tempted to panic and sell. She just keeps putting it in all the time. she's going to have great performance. Jack Bogle used to say basically what I'm saying. He's the guy who created index funds, founded Vanguard. He said, and this goes back in the days when you used to get paper statements. He'd say, don't even open the statements, at least for 20 years. And then when you open your statement after 20 years, have a cardiologist standing by because you are going to be stunned at how much wealth you've accumulated.
I love
right?
that.
The other side of my readership, by the way, are people like us that love this stuff. And they are forever reaching out to me and saying, hey, JL, the simple path to wealth is great. But if you just tweaked it this way, if you just added this thing, if you just did this little thing different, and if you have that mindset, it's never going to be that one tweak. Then you're going to come across another tweak that you're going to want to make, and another one. And I would bet enormous amounts of money that at the end of that 20 years, my daughter, who doesn't pay any attention, is going to be far, far ahead of those people who relentlessly tweak back and forth, trying to get that extra edge. It's not worth the time, it's not worth the effort, and it's probably going to give you a worse result.
That's the tweaky path to wealth. We don't we
the
don't
tweaky,
like that one.
The tweaky path to a little less wealth.
A little less wealth.
I mean, you'll still get there, but you will have spent a lot more effort for a less result.
Yeah.
And I know because I spent decades doing that.
Yeah. I mean, there's something to that. I have a question for you. Since you do care about financial information and financial news, how do you personally block away all of the noise that's happening in the financial markets, a lot of things that have happened this year, in order to keep that, I guess, centered piece of calm and continue to go on a simple path to wealth?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wasn't always able to do this, by the way, but at this point, I've lived through enough market downturns that they interest me, but they don't scare me in the least. And make no mistake, I mean, I that wasn't always the case. I used to find them as terrifying as most people still do. But now I recognize them as the perfectly normal part of the process that they are. I recognize that they never last. They always run their course and then go on. I recognize that, oh boy, I get to buy shares at a cheaper price. And I look at the market every day. I love it. But I wouldn't recommend most people do that because it's terrifying too often. So unless you are able to have the psychological distance from what you're seeing, that for me took decades to cultivate, unless you're able to do that, it's not something you want to engage in if you want to be a successful investor. So when my daughter shows no interest in engaging with it, I applaud that.
Yeah.
Because there's really no need. I mean, I only do it because it amuses me, and partially it's kind of what I do. It's worthwhile for me to know that the market's up today, for instance, and it's kind of, for the most part, regained its losses from earlier this year because I do interviews like this.
Yes.
So maybe there's some function to that. But if it wasn't for that, there'd be absolutely no function other than entertainment to paying attention to it.
Yeah, I think there are some folks out there, and I'll put myself out there as one of them. Certain media sources maybe will stoke more fear or more anxiety than others, and I've learned over the years to try to block out certain types of media that come my way in order to keep that calm. Is that something you learned over the years too?
Yeah, and the thing you have to understand about the media is, and this was not always true, but these days, the mission is not to inform you. The mission is to get eyeballs. And what people have figured out in the media, in social media, traditional media, what they figured out is that the best way, the most reliable way to get eyeballs is anger and fear. So they're constantly presenting stories that either will anger you or make you fearful. And so when the market drops, it's going to be fear, fear, fear. So I don't know, a month ago, 6 weeks ago, whatever it was now, and then the market was down just, I think, 19%, not quite hitting a bear level. That was all over the news. The fact that it's now pretty much recovered, you don't hear about because that doesn't stoke any fear or anger, right?
Yeah.
If it turns around and goes back down again, then you'll hear lots and lots of fear and anger. And that's just the nature of the beast. And as long as you understand that you're not getting, you're getting broad-based information. For instance, uh, there's a wildfire in New Jersey. Well, if you see that on the news, then you can be pretty sure that yeah, there's a wildfire in New Jersey. All the rest of it around the reporting of that wildfire, that New Jersey is now burnt to a crisp and nothing exists or lives in New Jersey anymore, is probably not as true,
Yeah.
right? So that's where you need to draw the line. So in broad strokes, the basic things you hear will be true. All of the fear and anger around it was what you need to be cautious about.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what we talk about, seems financial and mathematical, but man, so much of it is emotional, psychological, and a big part of what you're discussing here is the merging of those two. Now, a big part of your research that you did in the updated version of the Simple Path to Wealth
Right.
shares some cool numbers, updated over 40 years, 50 years of this simple path. Can you talk to us about those while we're talking about truth and certainty?
Yeah. So when I was first writing the Simple Path, the original version, it took me 3 years, and I finished the manuscript in 2015. I published it in 2016. And what was interesting about that is that was a nice, clean 40-year period, because the first time I invested in stocks was in 1975. And as I'm working on the manuscript, I'm thinking, I ought to look up how the market has performed over that 40-year period of time, because that'll be relevant to what I'm talking about in the book and what the market can do for you. And so I did. And kind of to my horror, the number was 11.9% on average annually. Now, to be clear, that doesn't mean the market reliably goes up 11.9% every year. I mean, some years it's down, some years it's up much more than that. But on average, it balanced out to almost 12%. That's a stunningly high number. And the last thing I wanted to do was to write a book that suggested you could expect that kind of annual return in some reliable way, because I think that's very risky to think that way. But on the other hand, that was the actual number over an extended period of time. In fact, that prompted me to write one of my all-time favorite blog posts, which is called "Time Machine and the Future Value of Stocks." The conceit of that post is, I'm back in 1975. I'm sitting around the campfire with a bunch of friends, and somebody says, "Hey, I just read that this guy Jack Bogle created this thing called an index fund. I wonder how that's going to do over the next 40 years." And at that point, I say, "Well, as a matter of fact, I just happen to be back from 2015 in my time machine, and I can tell you exactly what's going to happen in the next 40 years." And then the rest of the post goes on with the litany of disasters over that 40-year period: stagflation, market crashes, wars. I mean, it was not some golden age. And then, of course, everybody around the campfire is, "Wow, I'm glad you came back to tell us that. I mean, obviously, we're not going to invest in the stock market. That just sounds like an awful period of time." And of course, the kicker is, yeah, and during that awful period of time, 11.9%. So now I'm working on the new edition.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, now I got a 50-year. I can't believe I've been doing this 50 years.
Ah.
But anyway, now I
Thank
got
you
a
for
50.
doing it, by the way.
Yeah, now I've got a half a century to look back on, right? And in that 10 years, now we'd had COVID, and we'd had, multiple political upheavals and what have you. So I thought, well, let's see what kind of damage this has done to my 11.9% number. Well, turns out over 50 years, the market's up 12.2%.
Wow.
Yeah. And so again, another decade of turmoil, and yet the market continues to grind higher. I still will say, don't ever do your planning assuming that you're going to get 12% a year reliably. But nevertheless, the truth is that's what the market's done for the last half century. And what's interesting to me about this last 10 years is 10 years ago in 2015, 2016, all of the smart financial guys were saying, the market's done really well since the 0809 debacle. You can't expect to get these level of returns going forward. So for the next decade, expect 4% returns. Well, of course, it did considerably better than 4% returns. Now, nobody knows what it's going to do in the next decade. The point here is that it's an incredibly powerful wealth building tool, even at times where there's turmoil, because there's always turmoil in the world. That's
Yeah.
just the way of the world.
Yeah. I'll ask a couple nerdy financial questions. Is this dividends reinvested?
Yes.
Okay. And then
Yes.
when you say the market, is this the total market fund, or is this S&P 500 when
This
you're
is looking at S&P
S&P
500
500?
because
Okay.
that's
Easier
the
to track probably.
well, that's where the data is
Yeah.
available, right? So even though I'm a proponent of the total stock market, the data is most easily accessible with the S&P 500. In fact, in the book, sometimes I use the Dow 30 instead of the S&P 500, and the reason for that is the S&P 500 doesn't go back 100 years. So if I want to look at data going back 100 years, then I've got to look at the Dow. Now, the truth is, when you look at these three and you map them out, their performance tracks remarkably closely. So, they are good proxies for one another. But like I say today, I like a little Tabasco on my eggs. I like a little total stock market in my investment.
I love it. I love it. Well, there are a lot of folks that have used the simple path to wealth to provide themselves some freedom, and there are a lot of folks in this community that continue to want to to own their time
Right.
and want to start their own kind of business as a solopreneur, maybe a digital solopreneur. You talk about FU money a lot in your content. Can you talk how that might help people with this process?
Yeah, I think most commonly, FU money is seen as the same thing as being financially independent. So, with that caveat, I see it slightly differently. I've always thought of FU money as the interim step between when you start and when you become fully financially independent, right? So, financial independence is not a light switch; it's a journey. So, the moment you start that journey, the moment you start saving and investing, you become a little more financially strong, kind of like going to the gym. The moment you start, you become a little stronger. And then over time, as you continue to stay the course, you become stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger until ultimately you get to that point where you're fully financially independent. But that interim is when you have FU money. And FU money allows you to make much bolder choices in your life. It allows you, for instance, to say, you know what? I don't necessarily have enough to stop working forever, but I probably have enough to stop my day job and try the business idea that I've been noodling around and I think has some potential. And the FU money is what gives you the runway to do that. And of course, if you succeed, then great. If you don't succeed, you can go back to a W-2 employment and pick up again, right? So FU money is power, uh, power and freedom to make bolder choices than anybody living paycheck to paycheck can ever make.
I love that. Now, are there any other ways that you think the simple path to wealth aligns with this path of owning your own business or digital solopreneurship?
Well, I think it aligns with it in the sense that it provides the resources to do that, right? To, again, once you don't have to wait till you're financially independent, but it will help you build that FU money that you can rely on while you're trying to get the business up and off the ground. The whole idea behind the simple path to wealth is there's a lot of things you can spend your money on. And to me, the most important thing has always been my freedom. The freedom to work where I want to work, as long as I want to work, for whom I want to work, or not at all. The freedom to make bolder choices in my life. And I can't imagine anything money can buy that is more important to that. So when people resist this idea, it's usually, oh man, that sounds like deprivation. I don't get to spend all the money I make. I got to save and invest some of it. And to me, that's just the wrong way of thinking. If you're not, you are spending it. You're just buying something that most people never realize is possible to buy, and that's your freedom. Again, to me, I can't imagine anything I'd rather spend my money on. But that's me. Other people listening might say, "No, I'd rather have the fancy house or the fancier car or whatever." So, you do you. But if you want to be financially independent, this is how you get there. And if you want to start a company at some point and you want that runway to give yourself some breathing room for it, this is the way you get there.
Absolutely. Yeah, it
Yeah.
definitely helped me on my solopreneur journey. Absolutely.
Yeah.
JL, there's somebody listening and they heard those 12% returns over 40 years, 50 years, and they think that's really impressive. But they say, well, these times are different, JL. There's some craziness in the market. There's some global turmoil. There's no way I can expect that in the future. What would you say to that person?
Well, that takes me back to COVID, right? So I remember during COVID, my blog comments lit up, my social media comments lit up, and basically the kinds of concerns that were there could be boiled down to jail. This time it is truly different. This time the simple path to wealth has to break down. This time people are dying. This time entire economies in countries are being shut down and for who knows how long. This time is truly different. This time is terrifying. And my response to that was, well, yes and no. So, yes, this time is truly different and especially tragic in that people are dying. And we haven't seen a pandemic in 100 years. So, that is new and different. But in terms of how the market's going to react, no. Because whenever the market crashes, there is always a trigger. And that trigger is always terrifying. It always feels like the end of the world because otherwise the market wouldn't be crashing, right? So, but the market follows the same pattern through all of these things. Sometimes the length of time varies, but the pattern is always the same. Recognition that something terrible has happened, panic around it, the market plunges. People try to figure out where the bottom is, and eventually it turns around and continues back up and goes on to set even greater heights, which, of course, is what's happened since the days of COVID. So it is never different. And if someday it is, by the way, if someday something happened, like let's take COVID as our example. Let's suppose that COVID had turned into something like the Black Plague that killed 60% of Europe's population. Well, if COVID had killed 60% of the world's population, that would be the end. But at that point, where you're invested isn't going to matter. I mean, that's going to be the least of our worries. So if someday I'm wrong about this, then, this is just game over for civilization for some extended period of time. And whether you're in gold or, unless you're storing canned goods in a bunker, it won't make any difference. And by the way, I know people who think that is coming
Yeah.
and who are doing that. And for what it's worth, I obviously don't think that's coming, but I wouldn't tell them to do something else. I mean, that's what makes them comfortable. I would say though that if you look at it and you say, well, there's maybe a black swan event out there, a civilization-ending black swan event, and maybe there's a 1% chance of that. And well, I'd say, okay, you can arrange your investment world or your world in general. This is beyond investments with the expectation that 1% thing will happen. Or you can do what I do and say, you know what? The odds are the 99% thing is going to happen. And I'm going to arrange at least my investment world accordingly. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I'd like to choose the optimistic path. Also, the one that has a lot of great historical data that proves that this path actually works over time. So I'm into your path, JL.
a great example of this, by the way, and I am old enough to remember this, although I was a child at the time, but it was the Cuban Missile Crisis. And that was, as far as we know, that was the closest that the world's ever come to an all-out nuclear war. And that would be a civilization-ending event. And at the time, there were people saying, this is looking really bad. We better sell my stocks. The wiser voices were saying, this is looking really bad. It's driving the market down. I'm going to load up on stocks because one of two things is going to happen. Either we're not going to have a nuclear war and stocks are going to come roaring back, or we are and nothing else matters at that point.
Yeah.
So
that's true. That's true. Well, there's somebody listening right now and they've enjoyed our conversation. What is one small step they can take following this interview to follow the simple path to wealth?
Well, the one small step is probably a pretty large step, actually. You need to arrange your life so that you're not spending every dime that comes your way. The larger amount that you devote towards your investments, the faster you'll get financial independence. And go out and pick the brokerage house that most appeals to you, whether it's Vanguard or Fidelity or Schwab or whatever, and find yourself an S&P 500 or a total stock market index fund. Open it, start putting money in it on a regular basis, set it up on autopilot, and forget about it. You're done.
I love it. I love it. Well, you've updated and you've enhanced this great book that millions of people have now, a million copies have sold worldwide. The Simple Path to Wealth.
Amazing?
I love it. I love just saying that. Congratulations. That's so cool. Around the world. That's very cool. Tell people about it and where they can get it, JL.
So come May 20th, I'm not sure when we're releasing this conversation, but before May 20th, it's available for pre-order. Most easily, I think, probably on Amazon. After May 20th, as the saying goes, it'll be in bookstores wherever books are sold.
I love it.
So that's a goal. It should be pretty easy to find, and people can always go to my website, which is jlcollinsnh.com, and that's a good place to start. You can find me on social media from there. You can find the book. You can read the rare occasions these days that I post something, but there's a lot of information on there from the old days.
Absolutely. And if you need to feel that sense of calm, especially as you're watching any of these news media outlets share any fear-stoking things, he's got a great YouTube video that just calms you down during market turmoil. I would highly recommend that one too. I'll put that in the show notes for everybody to check out.
My guided meditation.
Guided meditation. I love it. It's fantastic. It makes so much sense because when these things come up, you get that fear, you get that anxiety, but if you just realize that this is a normal part of the process, you look at a little bit of history, and you can continue to follow that simple path to wealth. I love it. JL, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you.
Andy, thanks for having me back. It's always fun hanging out with you and talking about this stuff.